think it was the most exciting and timely thing we could do. As we planned it, sort of three general sub-areas became clear within the larger umbrella of food law. They were biotechnology and genetically modified food issues, food safety issues, and obesity law issues. And as we sort of investigated those more, and you will see that, by the way, there's two panels on each of those three subjects, that those three sort of fall into a more general theme of following a food product from its creation to its consumption. So that means the biotechnology section of the symposium is sort of dedicated to the creation of food. The food safety is more dedicated to the distribution and care of food once it's created. And then obesity is about knowledge of how we consume food and what we actually put in our bodies. So we thought that it neatly lined up that way. And there's a lot of other major issues to cover in food law, like, for example, farm subsidies, but there just wasn't really enough room to fit them. And I think we have a great content lineup so far. So I'm going to hand it over to Asya to talk a little bit more about the specifics.
First of all, I just wanted to kind of ground the mission of our symposium in the mission of the school. Northeastern University Law Journal is grounded in the vision of bringing together academic discourse with practitioners' experience in an effort to provide a forward-thinking and cohesive body of knowledge. The purpose of today's symposium mirrors this vision. We have selected a group of highly qualified individuals to discuss both theoretical and practical aspects of food and agricultural law, covering topics from the hurdles and effects of obesity litigation and the impact of fast food marketing to low-income populations, to the challenges in keeping food safe for consumption through regulation and the litigation that results when this does not happen, to the theoretical aspects of biotechnological advances and the imminent presence of litigation involving genetically modified foods, and finally, to social and ethical implications underlying these topics. In the end, as Jason Sapson told me so aptly yesterday, we all have to eat. I look forward to observing what happens when leading academics, experienced litigators, and individuals at the forefront of regulation come together to discuss how and what we should and do eat. It promises to be a very exciting day. And now I'll hand it back over to Quentin, who will share with you some logistics.
Okay, so I hope all of you have the schedule, which lists the 6 panels. You'll notice that a lot of them are simultaneous, meaning that you'll have the choice of which panel to actually attend 3 times at 10:45, 1:45, and 3:30. And so basically that means we want to have as equal a distribution as we can between the 2 rooms. And we would appreciate that if we could make it happen. Another thing to mention is the schedule insert, which is the loose page. That is actually the accurate schedule as opposed to the one in the pamphlet. So the first panel in 250, will actually be Food Safety Panel 1, Controlling Contaminated Food, instead of Food Safety Panel 2, Inside Foodborne Illness Litigation. And we really appreciate all the panelists switching that around so we can make everyone be able to attend. Thank you. And the last thing I guess I'll say is the location for lunch, which will happen after the first panel, is the big sort of common room you saw when you came in at the bottom level of this building. That's where we will serve lunch. We should have enough for everyone, and there's round tables for everyone to sit at. And one more correction I want to make, I think it's an important one, is there was a misprint on the schedule. Josh Abrams was listed as Director of Litigation, National Consumer Law Center. That is, in fact, Stuart Rossman, our esteemed moderator for the first panel. He is listed correctly, but Josh is not. Josh actually works at Partners Healthcare, so I wanted to make that clear. Indeed. So I believe that's all for now. I think I'm going to hand it over to Asya to introduce our keynote speaker.
So I'm very pleased to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Marsha Echols. Dr. Echols is a professor at Howard University School of Law and is the director of the World Food Law Institute. She is an expert in international trade and development, international regional economic cooperation, and regulation of international sales of food and agriculture, as well as agribusiness development. She holds degrees from Columbia University, Free University of Brussels, Georgetown University Law Center, and Howard University. Dr. Echols has written many articles and books, one entitled Food Safety in the WTO, The Interplay of Culture, Science, and Technology, which is about food regulation and the cultural perspectives influencing food law, and also a book about geographic indicators. Dr. Echols is also a worldwide traveler and a member of numerous organizations related to international law and biotechnology. Thank you very much, Dr. Echols, for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you very much for inviting me to join you today for the discussion of a topic that is certainly dear to my heart. I work and research and think from the perspective that food is essential for all of us. None of us would be alive without food and water, clean air. But the idea of really having a legal focus or a legal look at where our food comes from, how we eat it, how we serve it, the role and perspective of the consumer, I think is very unusual. So when I was told about this conference and the topic, from seed to stomach, then I thought, yes, that's something that is worth thinking about, contributing to. As you just heard, I teach at Howard's Law School in Washington, D.C. And there I have created what we call a World Food Law Institute. And the idea of it is to look at some of the important policy issues surrounding food and agriculture, and international regulation of food and agriculture. Another idea of ours, or goal of ours, is to encourage more attorneys to be involved and familiar with food regulation, international food regulation in particular. Certainly at Howard and probably here, if you say, a career in intellectual property law, students are excited. If you say agriculture, the reaction is very different. And students don't understand what the opportunities are, what the role might be for the law of food and agriculture. So we're trying to show students through roundtables, symposia, different discussions and opportunities to what the importance of food and agriculture in terms of policy, but also in terms of law and regulation. So one of the things we do is have a series of roundtable discussions. We will have one this coming Tuesday at the European Union delegation in Washington to look at just one aspect of the new food safety law, and I'll talk about that a little later. We had a program about technology and food security at the Ethiopian embassy at the end of last year. So we pick specific issues to discuss and pull together a group of invited experts to have an informal, off-the-record exchange about it, lawyers, government officials, just a broad group of people. So that is the perspective that I bring, in addition to the perspective of the research that I do. Several of you are going to be in panels later today, that will look at biotechnology, food safety, fairly specifically and in detail. I'd like to take the time that I have this morning to present a broader perspective, to give you a framework or a background within which to look at the specific topics that you will be considering in the panels later today. And I will have an international perspective. So it looks like most of your panels will be focused on domestic law, U.S. law, and that's what many of you will have to address in your day-to-day work and practice. But very often what is done at the domestic level must fit into an international regulatory context. There are many international regulations that or conventions, guidelines, other documents that set a framework for what a government may do, how it may regulate. And that is that broader perspective that I'd like to give you today, but from the lens of the culture of food. The other thing I'd point out to you before I start is that I'm going to focus on food, not the seeds. I understand that the farming issues and the seeds issues and the biotechnology, the intellectual property, many other issues involved with seeds and farming are crucial to getting us the food that we eat all of the time, from the farmers, big and small. But I am going to instead look more at what is processed from what the seeds grow and look at food. Saying that, I think that in addition to culture, the culture of food, I think it is important to understand that food comes from farmers. Most of us forget where the food that we buy from the grocery store comes from. It's grown by someone. Now, in the United States, most of those growers are fairly large. We have what we call production agriculture. But in the vast majority of the world, food is produced by small farmers. And many of those small farmers are women. So women around the world are essential to the production of food and food security for the populations everywhere from Latin America to Asia to Africa, even probably Eastern Europe. So farmers, culture are essential to the foods that we eat. In a discussion this morning, I was thinking the anthropology of food gives us the culture of food today and gives us a perspective on what proper regulation should be for food. So the history, the culture, helps us give a perspective and a viewpoint that is communicated to regulators and develops into regulations. Since culture is different in the US versus in Europe versus in Cuba versus in South Africa, the regulations that you have internationally can differ and create conflicts if there is international trade. The point that can bring all of this together is perhaps an international agreement. So you have certain international agreements from the Codex Alimentarius Commission, from other international organizations that try to balance out the different perspectives that are reflected in the cultural aspect of regulation. So today, culture of food will be my sort of background focal point, but I want to look at culture and food quality, culture and food safety, how those safety and quality might overlap and create some conflict. And then I'd like to take a look at part of the new food safety law to show you how I think it is going to affect culture, small farmers, small food producers, processors from around the world. I said I think that we can't live without food. Food is culture, food is important. Many times we think that that's the perspective of people in other countries. We just go to the grocery store, we buy. So we had food for breakfast this morning. Probably nobody thought about, their eggs in the frittata. There was something about where some of the ingredients came from, but we really don't have that focus on provenance of food. But as the United States diversifies in population, we're getting large groups of people who do still remember that food comes from farmers. And so around the Washington, D.C. area, we have Ethiopian communities with special products like their injera bread. We have huge South Korean or Korean even communities in Northern Virginia. So you can drive along the road and all the signs are in Korean. But there are Korean restaurants there bringing in food. And we're seeing in Virginia and Maryland in our suburbs people who are bringing farming traditions from Asia, from Africa, and other places, and giving us new food, so broadening the idea of the culture of food, even in this country. Food security, so there's nothing in your program that specifically mentions food security, but all of this is to make sure that we have sufficient food, nourishing food, and you'll find that there have been many international meetings and discussions about what that means. But going back to the whole question of culture, I'd like for you to think, I don't know whether you've ever tasted a candy, a confectionery from France or Switzerland or Belgium with liquor, strong liquor in it. I mean, just with Cointreau, with Drambuie, with champagne. I mean, really hitting you with flavor and just sold, marketed, just as if it's cheese or milk. There's nothing special about it in the marketing, in the labeling, really in the regulation in those countries. All right, so that's candy with alcohol, with liquor. All right. I would say in some countries that kind of food product has been produced for years. It's a part of the diet. It's not considered so, it is special, but not so special that you need a special regulation of it. All right, so if I take that same product here in the United States, can you buy a candy with liquor in it here in Boston? Have you tried? Do you think you can? You might try. Can you find it? All right, the real answer is no, not with that same level of liquor in it. So I've gone from a culture that says confectionery with liquor in it is fine. It's really special. It's a specialty food, and it's permitted. And if a child eats it, all right, because the parents might let the children drink some wine anyway. All right, so that's one perspective. All right, taking liquor in foods, alcohol in foods. All right, you're looking at different cultures. So candy with champagne in France, in Switzerland, Belgium, it's fine. All right. In the United States, that same product, it's not unsafe. There's nothing unsafe about it. But it's not permitted here. Why? What's the difference in the cultural perspective, and how is that played out in law and regulation? Well, in the United States, you can buy a confectionery with a very limited amount of alcohol in it, certainly compared to Europe. But that is in our federal law. And the states pick up on that federal law and say, all right, you can have up to 5% alcohol content in a confectionery, in a candy. We'll permit that. We can't stop that because that's the federal law. But we can add some real constraints, restrictions. And those restrictions reflect the culture in different states here. So Florida might say, we want to label that candy with liquor to warn children. We don't want children to eat this product. Okay? It's not necessarily unsafe. We just think children shouldn't have alcohol, have liquor. Okay? Or a state might say, you can only sell these products in certain outlets. Again, because there's liquor in it. So you're seeing, even in the United States, perceptions, beliefs about a food reflected in regulation. So I've gone from Europe, same product not allowed in the United States, but something sort of middle ground that might be permitted. And now if I think about alcohol and alcohol in foods in Saudi Arabia, you can't have it. It's completely forbidden. So again, a different cultural perspective. They're based on religion for what should be the laws that apply to a certain food product. So I just want to use that to have you think culture affects regulation. Culture affects the laws that are, that you might take for granted here. In another place that's not such a clear divide between what should be permitted and what is prohibited. All of that, I've said there's no safety issue there. So I've shown that for food and quality, culture and quality, you can have some reflection in regulation. I'd like then to look at culture and food safety. Now, you're going to have several panels to discuss genetically modified organisms, GMO production, food. In the beginning, the use of genetic modifications was considered a safety issue, a food safety issue. And especially in Europe, consumers said, this is not safe. We don't know enough about it. It hasn't been on the market long enough for us to feel comfortable with it, to feel that it is safe. And Europe has used what calls the precautionary principle, to say, taken from environmental law, to say, wait a minute, if it doesn't matter so much what scientists say today, we need time to determine what is safe, what is all right for us to eat. That difference in view in Europe versus the United States became very marked and is continuing to this day. So in the United States, the regulators said, we see nothing different about genetic modification of foods. The foods are safe. Scientists say they are safe. Consumers should trust the scientist. And so we have in the United States huge production of soybeans and other products that are really essential to our food supply. So now if we eat a product, a baked good, a cereal, many other foods in the United States, if you're drinking a soda, a sweetened juice, it is possible that you are eating a food that somehow has been involved with genetic modification, or biotechnology, as the United States calls it. So even the culture is differences are reflected in the wording used. So we're saying genetic modification here. The U.S. government would say biotechnology, all right, and want a more neutral wording and framework given to something that has created huge differences among countries in international trade and for consumers. And on this, at the international level, there have been discussions at the Codex Alimentarius, right, and votes. I mean, in international organizations, you never have votes. But this was so important, especially to the United States, that they forced a vote in an international organization. There has been a lawsuit, a trade dispute at the World Trade Organization about genetic modification. Okay. So again, this whole issue is in terms of what consumers view and culture important, but it is also hugely important economically. So Monsanto and other companies have built their future on biotechnology or genetic modification and have had the United States government just push for the acceptance around the world of GMO products and seeds. And so you see China and India accepting, being more accepting of the technology, Europe resisting, parts of Africa resisting, parts of Latin America resisting, but at the same time, somehow there are plant areas in Latin America with genetically modified crops there. The whole question of GMOs at the international level, after the World Trade Organization dispute, the idea was, okay, there's no safety issue. You cannot legally say that biotechnology or GMO products raise a food safety issue. It's cultural maybe, consumers differ, governments have taken different approaches, but there is no safety issue. Scientists say there's nothing different about these products as they affect us and our health. So the discussion has moved to GMOs or biotechnology and the effect on the environment. Right. When you switch at the international level, you've changed from one international agreement, what's called the SPS agreement, on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, with real strict rules that all WTO members must abide by, to another agreement. So it's no longer about safety, which is controlled by the SPS agreement. It's now about something else, environment, quality, and that is governed at the international level by a different agreement, the Agreement on Technical Barriers to Trade, where the restrictions on what a government can do are much weaker, much less well understood. So again, this whole debate that you're going to talk about from the domestic perspective is taking place in an international context where the differences among countries still has not been resolved and continues. There's another way I'd like to look at this, and that is what happens when a traditional product or a cultural product is restricted for safety reasons. And in that connection, I'd like for you to think about what we call raw milk cheeses. So in New England, there's a lot of production of milk, of cheese. All right. In Europe, some of the most prized cheeses are made from milk that has not been pasteurized. So it gives it flavor, it gives it a cultural spin. Those cheeses are permitted in Europe. Okay. In the United States, the Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Agriculture say raw milk is not safe. Okay. And raw milk cheeses are not safe. So again, culture is leading to different regulatory approaches for a product that is a niche market product, clearly, but important and growing in the United States. So in the United States now, there are many women who are building very important niche markets in cheese, high quality cheese. Right? And some of them are interested in making raw milk cheeses because they think they're better. In doing that, in contrast to the more permissive attitude in Europe, American farmers and cheesemakers have to say, you can't have a real raw milk cheese. You've got to let it age for 60 days. Right? And the idea is to get rid of some of the moisture where scientists think the microbes, the safety problems could arise. So recently there was a recall of raw milk cheeses made by a woman cheesemaker whose products are considered very, very high quality. And you find that, but on the other hand, you find another American cheesemaker exporting raw milk cheeses to Europe and saying, okay, we can do this too. So again, the culture is there, but the safety regulation and the improvements in technology for detecting microbes are affecting what is permitted. Again, all of this to me is about small farmers, small producers. In the United States, much of our food and agriculture is from mass production. What we eat is, the cornflakes we buy in the store, much of the milk, many of the other things that we buy are not produced by small farmers on small farms, but are produced in large manufacturing operations. So you've probably heard about the chickens, the peanut butter, the beef, the eggs, all mass produced in this country. There is more and more interest, you probably know, though, among at least high and higher income consumers in local foods, in local production, just like in many other countries. And that production you go to a farmer's market to see where your food is coming from, who is producing it, and the regulations that are developed by the farmer's market, self-regulation, private standards, by USDA are weaker for these, to some extent, for these small processors as they sell through farmers markets to meet this growing demand for what is local and what has an importance in our diet. So for me, farmers are key to where we get food, and I wish more people would recognize that. I was explaining this morning, a few weeks ago, when there was so much discussion about the price hikes for foods that are basic, and there were beginning of riots or demonstrations in different countries because food was becoming more expensive. There were several articles in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times, in the Washington Post. And then in one of the articles in the Financial Times, the president of the World Bank wrote a piece that said, all right, G20, you're going to talk about food security at your meeting, your upcoming meeting. Here are, let's say, 8 steps that you should consider and think about as you're deciding what can be done to address this issue. All right, so 1 was transparency, 2 was something. The last one was about farmers. I mean, it just seemed, at the World Bank, you should recognize where food comes from and that you're helping farmers around the world. And I read it late at night, and I was so upset. I just sat down and I wrote a letter to the editor of the Financial Times, and, just maybe a paragraph. And I said, this is all wrong. Farmers are first. And I thought, okay, this will never be published, but I had to vent. I just had to say, this is important. This is the wrong perspective coming out of the World Bank and trying to direct other leaders. And the next morning, I received an email from someone I know in Japan. Or it was actually later that night. Email from Japan saying, surprise, I was having breakfast in Tokyo and I saw your letter to the editor. And I thought, wow. And I had to go find it myself. I had to wait to get the paper because I didn't know what had happened. But they did publish it next to a Financial Times editorial saying farmers need it. And I think this whole idea of really recognizing how we get our food, but how most of the people in the world get their food is really important. So, as a final note, I wanted to link what I've been talking about to the new food safety law that was signed by President Obama in December. It's the FDA Food Modernization Act. And this is only about the Food and Drug Administration, but the purpose is, in part, to give FDA a lot more authority to regulate the foods that we have in the United States on safety grounds, ostensibly, because it's food safety. It's about everything has said food safety. And this has nothing to do with what USDA does with regard to meat and poultry and eggs. So this is all the products that are regulated by FDA, most of our food supply. There is in Title III of the bill, of the law, a section about imports of foods and trying to ensure the safety of the foods that come into the United States from other countries. Right. There are several pieces of that title. Giving FDA more offices overseas, giving FDA more authority to inspect overseas, imposing negative repercussions if a plant overseas or a government overseas doesn't allow and agree to those inspections. Provisions saying FDA go out and try to negotiate agreements or agreements with other countries about these inspections and really carrying U.S. standards for safety and providing safe food, preventing problems overseas, so that the foods that are permitted to come into the United States are safe. Well, there are two provisions in this title that I think are going to cause problems for small farmers around the world, small producers around the world, and small countries around the world. So one is that now an importer is going to be required to vouch for the safety of the foods being imported by that importer. Right? That's putting a new burden on the importer, okay? And saying to the importer, make sure, look at the safety provisions in that facility that you're going to be bringing foods from. Basically, think about the food safety standards in the country that the food is going to come from. So it's really forcing the FDA to negotiate the agreements, but individual importers to take much more responsibility for the foods they bring in. All right? And in a way you say, all right, what's wrong with that? Okay. All right. If I'm bringing in a product from Britain, maybe not so much a question. If I'm bringing in a product from Canada, probably no problem. I want to bring in a product that I saw and is really special from Bangladesh. Do I dare? Okay. Do I have the money to go through all the steps that are required? Is the producer there able to do it? Is the government there able to oversee the production there? All right. So I think this new law might have an effect on the foods that will be coming into the United States and where they will come from. So earlier this week I was in San Francisco for the Winter Fancy Food Show. There were products there from Peru, from Madagascar, from India, from Mexico, from Italy, of course, France, Germany, Canada. But countries from around the world. I think there are about 40 countries exhibiting there. They're saying these are the products that we have, and this is what we'd like to sell to U.S. retailers and distributors and others. Okay. Will importers in the future be able to bring those products in, practically speaking? What is the answer to that, and what are the trade implications of this new law? And will the effect of the new law be judged under this agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary procedures, which give FDA a lot more leeway to take actions to have safe foods here? Or if really you're just preventing some of these traditional foods that are cultural from coming in, could you switch to the more lenient agreement on technical barriers to trade? I mean, there are detailed regulations or provisions in each. But again, this new law, which many people think is very praiseworthy, could impact small farmers around the world. The kind of foods that are available to us, if you see all of the different products that you can find in the stores now, maybe the selection will become a little more limited because importers are not as willing to bring in foods from certain countries. So I'd like to, I forgot to look at the time when I started, so I will stop now. But just please think about food and culture, food and tradition, food and small producers as you're going through the panels for today, because again, we can focus on litigation you're going to talk about and some other things, but this is all because we have food, we need food. I think that should give us a different attitude towards food. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Echols. I would now like to pass the mic on to Tony Moss, executive chef and proprietor of Craigie on Main, a restaurant just across the river in Cambridge. Apart from serving inventive and, for lack of a more deserving superlative, delicious food, Chef Moss has been a longtime proponent of local and sustainable food. Not only is Chef Moss an award-winning chef and a James Beard Award finalist, he is also a thinker and leader in the food movement. Chef Moss, I'm thrilled that you have braved the storm and have joined us this morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Cambridge roads are nowhere near as nice as the Boston roads, I'll tell you that. I'm Tony Moss. I'm the chef and owner of Craigie on Main. We're right in Central Square. We've been there about 2 years now, and before that we were a little restaurant outside of Harvard Square called Craigie Street Bistro. So we've been sort of walking our walk for 8 years now, and it's been an absolutely wild ride, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a pleasure to be here speaking to all of you. I think I'm uniquely qualified to be speaking to you. I absolutely love everything about food. I love eating it. I love cooking it. I love smelling it, butchering it. Love talking about it politically, love talking about it philosophically, and then regarding legal matters, I've got 4 different lawyers that need to represent me and my business for all different things, so I feel like I'm absolutely uniquely qualified to speak to all of you on such a snowy day. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about just my perspective on food and sustainability, and obviously that's a catchphrase. You hear that all the time. What does that really mean? What does it mean to me, Craigie on Main? I'm a business owner. I'm a chef. We aren't just hippy-dippy about it and, get to walk around and talk the talk. We think that, again, we really walk the walk as well, which is not an easy thing to do, especially when you're also a business owner and you're living in New England and you've got days like today where obviously not everything is coming from our backyard. So I thought the first thing I would do is read you the statement of principles from the Chefs Collaborative. Has everybody here heard of the Chefs Collaborative? Is everybody here a member? So it's a really unique organization. They're great. They're nationwide. It was started by chefs. It's focused a lot on education and sustainability and how we spread the word. And we feel that chefs have, especially in today's society, today's world, right now, we've got a big voice. For some reason, all of a sudden, you guys have felt that we're really interesting people. And you can see us on TV yelling and screaming and all this fun stuff and, pitted against each other, cutthroat, going at it. And that makes me exceptionally qualified, again, to talk to all of you. But people do listen, and we do have a really unique perspective. And I'm dealing with food issues, food law, food safety, daily, and not just internally, but then, of course, people are asking me questions, and, I've got things like this, and people are asking me questions literally all day long via Twitter. So, Facebook, email, whatever, they've got access to us, and I think it's really important then that I actually am informed, that I'm not just talking baloney, and I know what I'm doing, and I stand for something that's really important. So I'm going to read this to you, and then, again, spare the hippy-dippy stuff, but there's some important things here that I think can spur us on to some additional conversation. So from the Chef's Collaborative, number 1, food is fundamental to life, nourishing us in body and soul. The preparation of food strengthens our connection to nature, and the sharing of food immeasurably enriches our sense of community. I can't reiterate that enough. I mean, the thing that got me into food, besides the fact that I thought it was delicious when I was a young kid, are these memories of sitting at a table, with the people that were nearest and dearest to me. And in a way, in a restaurant, that's why I own a restaurant. I'm trying to recreate that daily. Not just for myself. I mean, I get to watch, for those of you who've been to Carnegie Mellon, we've got this great open kitchen, and I can see everything you're doing. And we get to put smiles on people's faces. And that's one of the joys about it. I mean, food has a really unique power. So the fact that we're even talking about it in a legal perspective or anything else like that, in some ways is very odd, because the basis of it should be so pure and so simple. And that's what's really beautiful, and that's what makes it a lot of fun for me to cook food for people. Number 2, good food begins with unpolluted air, land, water, environmentally sustainable farming, fishing, humane animal husbandry. Again, I mean, how many laws would we really need if we just sort of did what we were supposed to be doing? So much has come out of us needing to be much more productive, and we've sacrificed the heart and soul of what food is all about to distribute it faster, to have things that stay on shelves longer. Maybe a tomato needs to be redder. And all of a sudden we're doing things to food that really were never meant to be done. And now we have to protect all of you guys from our own actions, from our own, in a way, greed. And that's obviously a common theme, and I think in a lot of American society, but that's a lot of what we're talking about. So when we get back to the basics, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about sustainability, what I'm really trying to do is avoid all this crap and get to real food and do some real cooking that can make people happy, and then I don't have to worry about nearly as much stuff. 3, food choices that emphasize delicious, locally grown, seasonally fresh, and whole or minimally processed ingredients that are good for us, for local farming communities, and for the planet. 4, cultural and biological diversity are essential for the health of the earth and its inhabitants. Preserving and revitalizing sustainable food, fishing, and agricultural traditions strengthen that diversity. 5, by continually educating themselves about sustainable choices, chefs can serve as models to the culinary community and the general public through their purchases of seasonal sustainable ingredients and their transformation of these ingredients into delicious food. 6, and the last one, the greater culinary community can be a catalyst for positive change by creating a market for good food and helping preserve local farming and fishing communities. So here I am, chef and owner, and that sounds all great. So what am I doing about it? I own a 96-seat restaurant, and in many ways, a lot of the things that we're doing are pretty hypocritical. I have to bring in food from all parts of the world to make this work, to serve you guys, to operate a business, and it is a business. As much as I love it, as much as why I got into it had nothing ever to do about a business. When I chose to be a proprietor, an owner, I now have to make a lot of decisions, because if I don't do it well, if I make poor decisions, I don't get to do it at all. It's that simple. And then I get to go home, and the only person I'm going to be cooking for is my wife and my son, and while they'd be very happy, and I'd be pretty happy actually in a perfect world too, but that's just not why I do this. So we look at sustainability in our restaurant in a lot of different ways, and a lot of the choices we make, and nothing is perfect. And I think that's really important that everybody on every level hears that. And one of the things that I do tell a lot of people, whether you're coming from a suburb, in Framingham, and you want to know more about where you can get locally grown whatever, or you're one of my purveyors and you're talking to me about stuff, it's like what we try to do at Carnegie Mellon is simply make the best choices possible in that moment. So obviously, on a day like today, my choices are limited. But I still know that with a little bit of research and with a little bit of thought, I can make much better choices than what I might have done otherwise. And when it's July and the farmers markets are bountiful and I can do so many different things, then maybe my choices are easier, but maybe I'm going to still make them. And for when I'm telling someone in a suburb, well, the farmers market, blah, 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 where is it? All that kind of stuff. It's so much easier to go to Whole Foods. I understand the ease of it. And what I try to tell people is, that's fine. And when you need to go to Whole Foods on a day like today, I don't think you should be, in any way berated about that. That's a necessity. We do have a life to live. But when you have the choice, it's important that you make the right one. And identifying where you can actually go 2 minutes out of your way, where the markets are, what days they are. Those are the types of things that I really try to educate people on, because I think there are always choices. So obviously, in a restaurant setting, I've got more opportunity. I have much greater access to a lot of the product that you guys might even be talking to today, and having to make some different decisions that most of our guests, to be quite frank, shouldn't know about. I mean, they're there to enjoy your experience, but we want them to feel good about it walking out. So one thing that has come up a lot, and I don't know if anybody's been following what's been happening in Legal Seafoods the past week, but they're hosting a dinner, obviously based on fish, and they kind of wanted to raise a point about this idea of sustainable fish. A lot of discussion is around like Monterey Bay and the fish that they are sort of proclaiming to be safe to eat and sustainable to eat. And that's a really confusing issue. Really confusing issue. And this is something that I deal with every day. So I want to talk to you a little bit about fish, because I think it's very tangible. Some people's idea of what is sustainable with fish is just exactly that. What's on that list? Good to eat, plentiful, it's there, you can eat that. Don't buy this. Don't buy bluefin tuna. Don't, all these don'ts. And all of a sudden you're sitting at a supermarket and you're trying to go down this list and be like, well, geez, all of a sudden I'm relegated to this farm-raised salmon that's coming from Nova Scotia. But is that really sustainable? And I think those are important questions, and you have to dig a little deeper. It's not that simple. For instance, if I don't buy local cod or local haddock or local monkfish, okay, I am now not supporting my local fishery. How sustainable is that if our local economy is not going to be strengthened? I think that's really important. So what we try to do in that measure is then to ask a lot of questions and to put a lot of pressure on the fishermen that we are working with, making sure that they're not using gill netters, which are the big nets that simply drag along the bottom and tear everything up, using lines, using safer netting, things like that, because it's important that we don't let the local fishery go down. I mean, imagine, for those of you who aren't from here, I mean, this is what New England has been built on. We're talking about Gloucester, we're talking about, Point Judith, Rhode Island, Portland, Maine, some huge fisheries that are coming out of there, and without that industry, our economy would be devastated. So you can't let that go. So we balance that. Then let's look at farm-raised fish. Well, there's some different methods within farm-raised fish. Some of them are absolutely terrible. Maybe you've heard about some of them. Some of them are the salmon farms and stuff like that. They crossbreed. Some of the fish get out because they're not well kept, and all of a sudden there's pollution involved with what they're fed and the waste. But then there's some other farms, in Kona, Hawaii, they're raising kampachi, which is a type of tuna, in these big, big, big nets, almost like as wild as can be, and they're way offshore, and they actually move these nets from time to time, so they're never, accumulating so much waste in one area. It's a really interesting process. They're feeding them all natural feed, not just other animal byproducts and stuff like that. Now, I have to fly that all in from Hawaii. So what am I going to do there? All of a sudden, we're talking about 4,000 miles. How sustainable is that? Well, then what we're doing is we're putting a lot of pressure on them to make sure that they're flying on commercial airlines, the flights that are already in process. And I'm supporting a farming technique that I think is really significant, because one day, that type of farming, if I can keep these guys successful, that type of farming is going to spread, because people have to know that their business is going to be sustainable in its own right. That is a huge part of it. So people are going to look at Kona, or they're going to look at some of the cobia that's coming out of Australia, being raised in very similar ways, farmed right. And if that model succeeds, then we can get rid of some of the salmon, in Nova Scotia that's being farmed so poorly, and present a different model. So maybe it would be more local. And I think that's really interesting. So at Craig Young, we're trying to support both. We're absolutely bringing in product, and this is true not just for fish. I'm just using this as one example. But product from many, many miles away, around the world because it supports one aspect of what we believe in, and we want to support that so that it doesn't go away. So hopefully that method spreads, the word spreads. And then we also want to support our local. And when we can make those choices in the summertime, where it's 10 times more obvious and, quite frankly, easier, then we're going to do that 100%. So my carrots today, are not coming from someone's backyard. I do have one farm who's got a large storage crop, and they come once a week now because, weather permitting, that's what they can do. So I buy as much from them as I possibly can. And then there are times when my carrots are coming from California. We make some, it's a little hypocritical. We make some, to me, very obvious lines. We draw some obvious lines in the sand just because we were trying to make a point. I don't serve any tomatoes until it's August. Why? Why do I want something that's so perfect looking and tastes like cardboard? It's my job as a chef to come up with tasty things all, winter long. So I'm cooking with Jerusalem artichokes, I'm cooking with celery root, I'm cooking with turnips. Maybe some things that you once considered more pedestrian, or some things maybe you never even considered cooking because you didn't know what to do with. Well, that's my job. And I know where they're coming from, and I know that they're local, and I know that they're sustainable, and I can do something that's really tasty with them. So I think that's one way that we can preach. And when I teach classes or when I am tweeting about things and stuff like that, I'm always highlighting a lot of these ingredients or putting recipes on our website because we want people to feel less intimidated. And that's a huge part of it. So many people now are so far removed from the process of food. We heard a little bit about that earlier, that, you walk into a grocery store and you think that's where it came from. It was born in this plastic wrapped thing with no skin on it and no bones, and that's the way a chicken is. And they don't even realize where a chicken came from. And actually, a chicken is not a chicken. That chicken is that chicken. Where is it from? How was it raised? None of you guys look alike. And quite frankly, none of you would taste the same either. Because you're all from different places and you've all been eating different things. And you can't say that about a chicken. So you can't just think of it ubiquitously. And as a chef, that's what I do. But I'm actually trying to teach people that. Because, you've got obvious things like Tyson, and you can hold them up there and, call them really bad. And they're terrible. But there are other people that are doing things that you want to really grab onto as well. And it's not just local. Local is important. But then you want to take it to the next step. And that's one of the things I really try to educate people on too. Just because the carrot came from my, backyard doesn't mean it tastes good. So as my job as a chef, I'm trying to marry all of these things. You don't want my job. It's not what it looks like on TV. So, it needs to be local. It needs to be tasty. It needs to have the right message attached to it. I need to make sure that I'm conveying the message, and that's what we're really trying to do at Craigie on Main. Phew. And someone in there, I cook. So it's evolving. We have to pay attention to all of the laws that you are discussing or are going to continue to discuss, and I think a lot of them are obviously important, and some of them are a little bit of a waste of my time because what they do is they really focus on big business agriculture, and that's what we're really trying to get away from, because if you're really focused on quality of food and the deliciousness of food, big business agriculture ain't going to produce that. So we refocus a little bit of our priorities in the way we also cook our food. Americans, want big portions. We're bigger people, unfortunately. They want a lot of meat, heavy things, and that's why commodity beef is so popular. That's why all commodity agriculture in itself, the fact that you can get, anything, anytime right now, is so important. And we're really trying to take a step away from that. And I think that that's one of the things that Craigie on Main does really, really well. And in some ways, besides the fact that we're proud of the food we cook and it's delicious, I think that's one of the reasons why people really like us. Because they know they're going to walk into our restaurant, and obviously the service is great, and I think the food is pretty tasty, but that they can stand behind the product. And I think that we're all sort of reaching out for something like that because food is really confusing right now. So that's where we're coming from at Craigie on Main, and I'm happy to tell you more about it. And maybe I'll just open up the floor to any questions about how we do things. Not a single question? What?
I'd love to know your idea about raw milk cheeses.
I love raw milk cheese. I think that goes to the heart of food law protecting mass production. Raw milk is so much better for you, and it also happens to have so much more flavor. Now, can it be poorly treated or poorly handled? Absolutely. It is a more dangerous product if you don't know what you're doing, or if you're going to put it on a truck and leave it there in, above fridge temp and see what happens to it, and you're going to hurt some people. So when we start introducing laws that allow us to do things in production or in transport so that we can keep it at different temperatures that food's not really meant to be at, that's a problem. So it's a shame, because you've got this blanket law that says you can't serve raw milk